Here's a guy who still thinks he can debunk evolution.
I made a video 9 days ago debunking evolution twice in 9 minutes. If you just want two perfectly sound arguments against the theory of evolution, then watch that video. It, by definition, is an unscientific theory. It's not testable and unobservable.
It is testable. A great example of a test of evolution is when scientists predicted that since we have fewer chromosomes than some of the animals to which we are most closely related, we ought to see evidence that one of our chromosomes is a fusion of two chromosomes. Biologists looked at our chromosomes to see if one of them fit this description, and they found that chromosome 2 is in fact made from two chromosomes that fuse together. Evolution is also observable because we can see populations of organisms speciate from one another. Although this dude has a no true Scotsman argument that he's going to use to dismiss that fact.
Now, I was informed that some Darwinists responded to my video, and I was expecting some actual engagement, but all I got was a bunch of insults, some of which were based on my physical appearance. So obviously, if you have to resort to insulting someone, you can't actually refute their arguments.
I guess he didn't see any of my responses because never once did I mention his smarmy creationist face.
But for this video, I'm going to be responding to this comment, which was way more respectful than the videos that I watched. Before I do that, though, you guys have to be aware of the two most common logical fallacies that evolutionists make. The first one is going to be the equivocation fallacy. The equivocation fallacy occurs when a key term or phrase in an argument is used in an ambiguous way with one meaning in one portion of the argument and another meaning in another portion. This ambiguity can lead to a conclusion that is misleading or unsound. Here's an example of an equivocation fallacy. A bat is a mammal, therefore baseball players use mammals to hit baseball. Equivocating on the word bat, which can mean both a flying mammal and a piece of sports equipment. Now, the way that evolutionists use this is that they'll point to an example in nature that we can observe using real science, testable and repeatable in the present, and then they'll say, hey, see, look at the bacteria in the petri dish, right? It changes. Or just take the fact that there's hundreds of dog breeds out there today. See, all these dog breeds came about over time. Some of these dog breeds didn't exist in the past. Therefore, evolution is true. That is an equivocation fallacy. We are not talking about one parent and another parent passing their genes down to the next generation, and there's slight variation within one kind.
The irony of this guy calling this an equivocation fallacy is that he's using a no true Scotsman fallacy. Speciation is evolution, and we can observe speciation, therefore we can observe evolution. The difference between the level of evolutionary change that we can observe and the level of evolutionary change that takes too long to be directly observed is not analogous to the difference between a baseball bat and the order Chiroptera. So it is therefore not an equivocation fallacy to say that evolution has in fact been directly observed.
A mother with a big nose and a father with a small nose producing a child that has a medium-sized nose is evolution in the micro sense, okay?
No, it isn't. That doesn't necessarily involve any mutation or natural selection.
That's something that is clearly observed. Nobody would disagree with that. As Christians, we need to be aware of this because when they point to examples of change in the present that we can actually observe, they're using that as a basis to say that Genesis is wrong.
No, I'm not. Both microevolution and macroevolution can occur without Genesis being wrong. Even if Genesis is entirely correct, it could still be the case that new kinds of organisms have evolved from the ones which were originally created. The reason I don't believe that Genesis is correct is not because I believe that macroevolution occurs, but rather because I'm convinced that all organisms share a common ancestry.
God didn't create humans on the sixth day. Our ancestors are actually fish. Fish eventually turned into humans. Obviously, that's not observed. That's a different type of evolution. That's Darwinism.
It's not a different type of evolution. It's just a different amount of evolution. Both observable and unobservable amounts of evolution are Darwinism. That's why conflating the two is not an equivocation fallacy.
Macroevolution, whatever you want to call it. But clearly, evolution in that micro sense does not prove evolution in the macro sense. Okay.
Nobody's claiming that it proves it, only that it corroborates it, which is how the vast majority of empirical science works.
Okay. Now, the second most common logical fallacy that evolutionists make is going to be the fallacy of affirming the consequent. The beauty of understanding these logical fallacies is that you don't have to be well studied on the latest scientific literature of evolution to be able to debunk evolution. A lot of their arguments can be refuted by simple logical thinking. Okay, so let me explain this fallacy and how evolutionists commonly do this. The structure of affirming the consequent is a syllogism, two premises and a conclusion. If X, then Y, therefore X. An evolutionist might make this fallacy by saying, if evolution were true, then we should see variation within kinds. We see variation within kinds, therefore evolution is true.
That would certainly be affirming the consequent if that were the argument that biologists make. That's a deductive fallacy, and the empirical sciences rarely use deduction. This is the argument biologists actually make. If evolution is true, we would see variation within kinds. We see variation within kinds, therefore this evidence corroborates evolution. There's absolutely nothing fallacious about that syllogism. It's ironic that by accusing biologists of using and affirming the consequent fallacy, you just used a straw man fallacy.
The best that they can do is that we see all this stuff, therefore it's likely that evolution is true. And that's not a deductive argument.
Right, and nobody is claiming that it is. The empirical sciences rarely ever use deductive arguments. They use inductive arguments. That doesn't make them any less scientific.
So yeah, if you see someone making this type of argument, notice it, point it out, and show them why they're wrong. Now, let's respond to this comment. You fundamentally do not understand natural selection, okay? There is no entity making a decision in natural selection. I never said that there was, but the fact is there is. God is sovereign over all things. He is the one making choices. He is the one deciding which dog produces another dog and what kinds of genes will be passed down. Yes, God is choosing. What I wanted to point out, though, is that if an atheist believes in natural selection, they really don't like it when we point this out, but they are personifying nature as if nature is their God. You know, naturalism. Nature does this, nature does that, nature chooses, Mother Nature. Hence, Darwinism is a religion just like any other.
The difference between a biologist saying that nature selects certain genes over others and when a theist says that God makes that selection is that the biologist doesn't mean it literally and the theist does.
They have something that they believe, not based on any evidence, not based on any scientific in the present observation. They presuppose evolution and go out to defend evolution despite any evidence and despite the fact that it's an untestable, unprovable theory. That is to say, it's not a proper theory at all.
It is testable, but where do you get the idea that a proper theory needs to be deductively provable? The theory of gravity hasn't been deductively proven. The theory of relativity hasn't been either. Are they not proper theories? Can you give an example of a theory that you think has been proven?
I know nature isn't making choices according to you. I suspect you won't read this, and if you do, you will probably approach it with a completely closed mind. More presuppositions, presupposing that the people who don't believe evolution just can't reason at all. They're just too stupid, too dumb, too closed-minded, rather than actually dealing with what we're saying.
What evidence would convince you that the book of Genesis is wrong about where different species came from? I do suspect that there is no evidence that would convince you that this is the case, but am I wrong?
Okay, let's do a simple thought experiment to help here. If you threw 10 polar bears and 10 camels into the middle of a desert, which group is more likely to survive and reproduce over multiple generations? Well, the polar bears, of course. Camels, I don't think camels can beat the polar bears. If the polar bears are hungry, they're going to kill all the camels, right?
I don't think she had in mind that you would put them all together in the same spot in the desert.
Obviously, the camels. Really? Is it really that obvious? So here's the problem. This is precisely the point that I made in my debunking evolution video, is that there's no way to tell whether or not the polar bears are going to survive or the camels are going to survive in the desert without looking at who's going to survive.
Right, that's an experiment that you can do to test a premise of evolution. That is, that some organisms will survive longer in a given environment than others. That's why evolution is testable.
Survival of the fittest is just survival of the survivors.
Survival of the fittest is not intended to be a testable prediction. Her point seems to me to be that not all organisms are equally well suited to all environments. That is, in fact, testable.
There is nothing to test. There is nothing to predict. It's just the survivors are going to survive. That's evolution for you.
The prediction is that one species will survive longer than the other. That is testable. If the camels and polar bears survive the same amount of time, then the prediction is falsified. If one species survives longer than the other, then the prediction is confirmed.
Wow. Yeah, there's no decision process involved. Yes, there is.
What evidence is there for that?
It's not worshiping nature as God, because no one is saying that nature is a conscious being making choices of who lives and who dies. Yeah, I know. I guess I wasn't clear in that previous video, but the problem is that atheists personify nature as if it is this conscious thing that produced life.
Given that we know we're doing so metaphorically and not literally, why is that a problem?
Now, if you're wondering if the Bible teaches on evolution at all, I am confident to say yes. A lot of people get angry whenever I talk about evolution on the channel, of course. After all, this is your big theory. This is what you have to be true for the justification of your sin.
Why would I need to justify my sin? Even if I didn't believe in evolution, I would still unapologetically sin because I don't see a need to justify it. And even if I did, I don't see how evolution would justify it. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.